And I also want to begin with a bit of a devotional today. I get a weekly Torah commentary from James Kugel, who is an Old Testament scholar currently living in Israel. I thought his commentary this week was pretty appropriate for Lucy's talk, and I'll explain a bit of that as I go along. But he said this week's Torah reading records the moment when the Holy One commanded Abraham to set out from your homeland, your relatives, your immediate family, and go to the land that I will show you. It's in Genesis 12:1. He goes on then and talks about why all the secrecy around this land that I will show you. And he talks about what the rabbis have said over the years about that. But I thought some of his later comments were interesting. He said, just now, for many people, the world seems to be going the wrong way spectacularly. Russia and Ukraine, whole countries in Europe and America, North and South. And he doesn't mention Israel, but Israel, I think, is going in the wrong way as well. Plus individual strongmen and ordinary grifters now in office. Maybe that's his reference to Israel. Until the things that people had always taken for granted suddenly are not. How did this come about? Perhaps the answer is lurking in a place that I will show you. He picks up on that phrase. He said the Romans had a goddess called Fortuna, and true to her name, she helped make things turn out one way or another, for good or ill. It was like the toss of a coin. None of this quite fits with Judaism, however. Rather, we are the religion of the little man in God's great world, who nevertheless tries to find a place inside to fit within. So sometimes, indeed, we might do better to choose a different title for Abraham's journey, not the great man of faith, but something like departure to places unknown. This idea of a place that I will show you, Mary and I, when we came to Australia, came originally for a 2-year period and then extended to 4, and we never expected to be here some 30 years later. So it was a bit of a journey to a place that God showed us. And when I was thinking about Lucy's travels and her adventure recently, I thought that was also a bit of a going to a land place that I will show you. I think all of us, if we sign on to this journey of discipleship, we're in for a ride, a bit of an adventure. And often we don't know where that will end up, but we need to trust that God will show us where we need to be, and God will be with us in the midst of that. I don't think I need to do a long introduction of Lucy. Lucy has been on the exec of ANZ over the years, was in Sydney, moved to Queensland. Her partner Andrew is with us as well today. And Lucy was on a bit of an adventure over this last year, and we've asked her to come and share about that, some of what she did, some of what she learned. At this point, I'll turn it over to Lucy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge the lands that I'm a guest on, which is of the Guyabul Jaraware people. Some people add in the Jagera people as well. I've noticed lately. I'm not quite sure why, but I acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, how they've cared for this part of the world for a very long time before other people got here. So I live and create, in a sense, on this particular part of the country, and I'm very, very pleased and feel very blessed that I have good relationship with the traditional custodians here, at least some of them, particularly the Christian ones. So that's been a joy to me to walk forward together into what it means for me to be living up here now. I was born and grew up here, and was away for, I think, about 47 years. Can you believe that? Mostly in New South Wales and ACT. 27, the last 27 were in Sydney, and Andrew Park, that's my husband. We were living in Sydney for 20 years before we moved up here. He chose to come here, so I was very glad I could follow along to somewhere I knew. I also want to say congratulations and blessings to the newly elected AAANZ executive as of Thursday night, so you can always make yourself known to people. And I miss the company of being involved in there, but it was the right decision for me to just step back from that for a year or two to concentrate on what's happening up here. Of course, the big trip that I did this year was one of the unexpected, but I believe wise reasons as to why I pulled back from those responsibilities on the exec. And so thanks for tuning in this afternoon. Yeah, and I kind of can blame AAANZ. I mean, there's giving credit and laying blame, there's just a little spin around there, depending on what angle you're looking from it. And I've got a shocking sense of humour, so please forgive me if I cause any effect. Largely, this trip, which was called Creativists in Contested Spaces, that I went on with my close girlfriend from New Zealand. She lives in the mighty Waikato region, Hamilton on the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. There is a thread of AAANZ there because it was through Mark and Mary flicking me an email saying the University of Queensland, the Multi-Faith Chaplaincy Centre there, are asking if they can have the Anabaptist perspective represented in their multi-faith talks or discussions. There was a bit of a series of those, and they said, oh, Lucy's in Toowoomba, maybe she might be able to duck down to Brisbane. Of course, it was during COVID. So Andrew and I went together the first time, and then I just continued on after that, and then went to Zoom. From there, I was invited to partner with David Hale, who is the Anglican chaplain there at UQ, to write a book on peace building. So I thought that's a nice little trajectory, AAANZ, to the peace building ebook. And guess what? It still hasn't been released. I completed that project over 6 months with David Hale. At this point in time, he was a little embarrassed to say that it hadn't got to the point of being released yet. But don't worry, hold on to your seats, folks, because as soon as it is, I want to get it out there, and I'd love you to see it as well, because AAANZ and the Anabaptist perspective is very well represented in it, and I think you'd be pleased and proud of that outcome. But okay, so over to my trip. I'll just share the screen here because it seems like I've lived a lifetime since the trip. It's only been, I think, 3 or 4 months since I've been back. But I had to kind of refresh my memory, and fortunately I'd done a little trip log. So I'll just bring that up because there's a couple of photos that I might show you. So if you've got any questions as I go along, just make a little note of them, a mental note or a physical note, and we'll see. I'd love to get some feedback and any kind of interaction about it. But thank you so much, Mark, for your intro, because that made me feel, I was feeling a little bit nervous for some weird reason. But that was really lovely knowing that there's a Torah reading about going into, new unexplored territory. And that's exactly what we did. I had a little document. That's the photo of Debbie there, and of course myself. And in between is this really interesting photo of a nebula or star constellation type pattern. And I thought, oh, it really explained it, because there was something to do with darkness and light that came to us as we planned this trip. As I said, it was unexpectedly come up, and I thought, oh, is it just something that Debbie and I, because we love traveling, we're great traveling companions. We've been to Israel a couple of times, as well as several other destinations in the world over the 30 years that we've known each other, through the International Christian Dance Fellowship, because we've both been involved with that creative arts networking movement, as we call it, for a very, very long time. So we're both trained dancers. Debbie actually has a PhD in ways of knowing and to do with creative arts, and in the adult education field particularly. And I've got postgrad qualification in adult education, so we sort of cross over there a bit too, but we enjoy dancing together. So we often, talk about, COVID's been around, haven't been able to travel anywhere, because traveling anywhere always costs lots and lots of money. and I always have to fundraise to do that. So I was very grateful to be able to, in a sense, advertise my need for support to be able to do this trip through AAANZ. So that was lovely. And I know people prayed for me as well. And I was very grateful. We were extremely aware of the great prayer cover that we had. And I had even some new contacts here in Toowoomba that just particularly wanted to pray for us. And since we've come back from the trip, they've been involved with creative arts enterprise, shall we say, here in Toowoomba with me. So it's amazing how you go to these unexplored territories in life and perhaps even geographically, and you never know what the outcomes are going to be. And I've been very pleased that they've been good. So we just made this little note about it. We thought about darkness and light. I think Mark mentioned in the thing, the world seems to be going incredibly, he didn't say it, but I guess some people call it to hell in a handbasket, doing it particularly spectacularly at the moment, a lot of us feel. And it's as if the dark is getting darker, but we know that the bright light of our Lord Jesus Christ and those who walk following him as disciples, he asked us to shine our light. He's the light of the world. And then he called us the light of the world. And I thought, wow, that's a bit incredible. I need to be illuminated more about that one. We felt that we were involved, particularly as intercessors, because we pray when we dance and when we live out our faith. Our expression of prayer is often to do with movement. You can see my hands sort of wandering around the screen there while I'm talking, because I'm that kind of holistic, expressive person in that way. I'm not actually an extrovert. I'm kind of an ambivert and at heart an introvert, because I need to shut myself away and just recoup all my energy so I don't get my energy from crowds. But I often present as an extrovert, so my apologies for that. Now, we aspired to incarnate the message of shalom, an activated concept of time and scape in which all may flourish in a way that only dance movement artists can. So we were trusting for long-term transformational outcomes and community building initiatives to germinate or fruit from our pilgrimage project. So we believe that, you know, there are divine aspects to people's stories, perhaps unrecognized or unacknowledged. We trusted that our visit want to have opened ideas and understandings and connections for a more cooperative human future in the little communities that we visited, but also that we would continue to process the experiences and have our respective and combined future work be informed and inspired by the people and places with whom we interacted. And we brought blessings from, of course, our husbands who released us to do some of this crazy stuff, our families, our communities with whom we're connected back home and without whom we could not have embarked on the journey at all. I just acknowledge Scarred Trees Indigenous Ministries and their Message Stick Mob, which is their online meeting place. In fact, they're meeting in person this afternoon in Glebe in Sydney. So, you know, I'm very sad to have moved up here and not get to see my lovely family community of Christian Aboriginal people as often, but at least I get to connect with them via Zoom. International Christian Dance Fellowship, because at the end of the trip, we ended up in Sweden at their international conference, and they have one every 3 years. So that's people from all different countries all around the world. We gather to dance, to fellowship, to pray, to worship, anything to do with movement and glorifying God. It's quite an incredible gathering of people, and a crucible, which over the last, say, 35 years or so, a lot of my faith formation and journey in the faith has come through that, not limited to that, but largely they're a very big community that's close to my heart. And also the Holy Trinity Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is where Debbie and her husband worship. He's the deacon there. Their daughter is married to the son of the Anglican Archbishop of New Zealand. So interesting connections. And of course, the Anabaptist Association, AAANZ, we brought greetings, and I did actually mention, a lot of people have not heard of Anabaptism, so it was lovely to give them a little introduction as to what we're all about. So anyway, as I mentioned, it was a fundraising project. We thought, well, where are we going to go? We really felt to go back to what some people call the Holy Lands. We wanted to meet with Palestinian people, Christian Palestinians, particularly supporting those brothers and sisters in some way, because they're not loved by the Israelis, and they're not loved even in their local community a lot of the time because it's largely Muslim community. So they're like a minority of a minority. I guess if you're not familiar, with the history of that whole space, place, land, and the things that are going on there, that's something that, you could research at your own leisure. We just felt that because we have the connections with Indigenous peoples in our respective lands, that we would want to go to people, the natives in the lands where we visit, to hear their stories, to listen to them. I was particularly impressed by a previous table fellowship where I'm very sorry, I can't remember the name of Athol Gill's sister, where she was talking about the book she'd written. And it was mentioned about him and his musical abilities, and how he would, be in a community at times, and he'd just like play songs back to them after experiencing being with them. And it sort of clicked off in my mind of, hey, we could do that with dance if he could do that with song. And so I thought, wow, that I just had that in my heart. That is something that we could do. Now, we might not be able to do it physically right there with the people, which would be great if we could, but from the experiences, we could craft some creative work that we could, in a sense, process through and present, I guess, for the rest of our lives in different versions, wherever we found ourselves, whether it was solo or duet work, even though we were traveling as traveling companions at the time. So where did we go? So I thought, she booked Turkish Airlines, and I thought, Turkish Airlines, we've got to go to Istanbul, Constantinople, Byzantium, all that history, the east meets the west and the north and the south, and the Ukraine situation that's happening. It's close to over there. My mind is ricochet rabbit in my head, ping, 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 all the connections, because I'm a connector kind of person. So I thought it's just was something about putting our feet down on the ground. And it's like we often think that prayer is an armchair or perhaps a knee pad exercise. But sometimes when you're involved with creativism, it takes you to places that were unexpected and experiences that are perhaps unprecedented, shall I say, in your lives. So that's what we sort of have a feeling, because we've been on prayer watches in Israel, for example, all over the country, which was a pilgrimage that we've done before, and also all around the old city of Jerusalem a couple of times in a couple of contexts to do with the dance fellowship. So we're fairly experienced in a sense of the lay of the land, so to speak, over there. But through AAANZ, as I mentioned, we had some brand new contacts. David Hale at UQ is very involved with Australian Student Christian Movement, and that was who we partnered with for the ebook. And so he said, if you're going over there, I might be able to connect you in with some Student Christian Movement people over there. And also he gave me the contact of the I'm just trying to think, it's the Archbishop in Jerusalem of St. George's College. And lo and behold, we were already going to book to stay at St. George's in East Jerusalem, because we have actually stayed there before. So it was this, we were stepping out into the unknown, but we got various confirmations and they seemed to come flooding in to go ahead with it. And I guess the main confirmation for me in a way was, if I got the money, I'd go, and if I didn't get the money, I wouldn't. So I did get what I believe miraculous provision, because it came in a patchwork in a number of ways, through someone buying a ticket, through the various cash donations, and through bursaries and scholarships and things that I applied for to defray costs for accommodation and other costs involved with the trip. So there we were in Istanbul on Friday, the 22nd of July, and we found out later on, after we, booked the tickets and all this sort of stuff, that it was actually the feast of St. Mary Magdalene in that city. That's that gateway, which is the patriarchate or the seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church today. And it was interesting that we found that, because with the Ukrainian situation, that Putin seemed to be misusing, in our view, the name of the church, and the church is like, Jesus Christ's body, to justify certain things that the Russians were doing in respect to Ukraine. So I thought, well, there's something, will be right at the seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And there we were on the Feast of St. Mary Magdalene, and she was termed the Apostle of Apostles, or Apostle to the Apostles. So it was also something on our hearts that we always are championing the, I guess, not so much the rights, but as the struggle of women as a gender throughout the ages in the Christian church, etc. And we see lots of conversations, some of them not so cordial, regarding the role of women in the church. And I think that, looking at the example of Jesus Christ and how he included women in his ministry, and that Mary was the one to bring the good news of his resurrection, etc. So I'm sure over many years you've heard a lot taught about that. And so we walked around the gardens, and it was just a light yoke and an easy burden kind of praying as we went around and did what we did. We were only there for 24 hours, but we really felt to go to the obelisk of Theodosius that was actually stolen from Egypt by the last Roman emperor and placed there in Constantinople, as it was known at the time. And we were just, praying as we were for peace, reconciliation, because, these big symbols of war, and the Turkish flag itself is red because the symbolism is the blood of the ancestors. And so there's very violent beginnings to the rise of the Ottoman Empire. But even before that, we see there's so much, in a sense, a quote unquote, blood crying up from the ground in many, many places, and continues to be. So somehow there's walking on the ground, your feet on the ground in those places. We can certainly pray from where we are, wherever we are in the world, and most of us are in Australia at the moment, these lands known as Australia, but putting your feet on those places, somehow in God's economy, in God's design of things, it needs to be done sometimes. I mean, Jesus put his feet on the ground of earth, was clothed in earth-made things himself. That incarnational mission, there's many different versions of what that means. That was a very long, hot walk that day. We went the long way. We visited, there was also the Serpentine Column, the Hagia Sophia mosque, and there's a little bit of trivia there that it was actually built as a Christian church first, and the architecture and that actually catalyzed, I guess, and inspired future Muslim or Islamic architecture. So I always thought it was the Islamic architecture, sort of had its own birth and everything, but apparently, according to history, that the research that I did, it was actually the design of church that then became a mosque that inspired a lot of the artwork and architecture for Islam from then on. So there's a bit of trivia for you. I don't know if you can see these pictures clearly big enough, but there's the Theodosius obelisk. That's some signs on the Hagia Sophia. And we felt very blessed. We're only there for, 27 hours, I think. But we did a cruise on the Bosphorus that night. It was a cultural cruise. It was great because they had dances and all that kind of stuff. But we felt like, hey, we're really sailing between Europe and Asia here. Wow, that's a contested space. If we think of all the contested spaces, whether they're within ourselves, whether they're in our families, our communities and beyond. But we felt, wow, we're on those waters, and it was at night, so it was a dark space. I think the artwork or series of dance works that we put into a program for this trip, it was called Penumbra, and that's the space between the darkness and the light. And we think of that as a very transformational space. And as we move toward the light of Christ through that dark space, we have transformation occur. So that gives you an idea of some of the concepts that we were carrying as we were doing the trip. Then we set off for Jerusalem. Of course, we have to transit through Tel Aviv to do that. So we flew from Istanbul to Tel Aviv and then got a shuttle to Jerusalem. We stayed at St. George's Cathedral Guest House, and here's a picture of some chairs in the cathedral. We thought that was good. That seemed to also talk to us, Jerusalem being known as titled the City of Peace. And there's a little cushion on one of the chairs in the cathedral. There was some towel art on our beds, so it was air conditioned, in a sandstone, the Jerusalem stone buildings, because all buildings in the old city of Jerusalem have to be made of the Jerusalem sandstone. And we thought that was interesting. This little, if you can see the head there, holding a flower a bit peacefully and lounging on the bed. So we were on this big short-term mission pilgrimage trip, but we did it in a way that we felt a lot of joy and relaxation as well, despite some hairy moments. We attended church at Christ Church in Jerusalem, and there's some mosaic artwork, etc., on the outside setting there. And we had a chat to an artist there that was a connection of an American friend who noticed on Facebook that I was going to make this trip, and I said, oh, you should contact Mike Bayliss while you're there. So he was a person that had made Aliyah, as they call it, which is going back to the land of Israel to live. If you're, have Jewish ancestry and stuff, you can apply to go back and live in Israel if you want to. And there's like tens of thousands of people that do that every year. And particularly, since the Ukraine crisis, etc., there's a lot of Ukrainian and Russian Jews who have made Aliyah that trip back. So this particular artist, it was a contemporary artist, and so he spent time with us and didn't know us from a bar of soap. So we had a bit of rest. Then we went to the West Bank. Wow, that was incredible. We had made contact again, as I mentioned, through the student Christian movement with the Palestinian student Christian movement. They work closely with the YMCA over there. So we actually, in a sense, met people that we didn't know we were going to meet with, because the student Christian movement people gave us a tour, a personal tour, and it was a young Muslim man who loved working with the YMCA because they understand about being in that contested space where danger, life-threatening danger, is part of their everyday experience, that as Christians, they know that to love and serve Jesus and work in that space is like, it's so difficult and they're up against so much, but they really do try to follow. And so even the interfaith with the Muslims, because you've got the Abrahamic faiths of the Jews, the Christian and the Muslims in that area of the world, particularly where those faiths were birthed, that even today they do work together because they understand that to build to peace in the community, you need to have unity. And there's a couple of pictures there. We stayed at Bethlehem Bible College, and here is a picture here. That's a little bullet hole that I've got my little mouse pointer on there in the window of our room. Our room was facing onto Hebron Road, and I thought, oh, this is like, we walked in there and we saw that. So we got no idea how old that bullet hole was, but it certainly didn't happen while we were there. And we did hear, there were some incidents. We stayed there for 2 nights, and, at 4 o'clock in the morning, you have the Muslim, the call to prayer. And then you hear these like firecracker sounds, and you go, they're not firecrackers, that's probably gunfire. And how far away is that? And are we okay? So I thought, that could be a great background for if you have a multimedia, while we're doing some sort of dancing, and we've got that in the background. But here's a genuine Banksy stencil. If you've heard of the artist called Banksy, who is a famous graffiti stencil artist. And while we were on the private tour, this young Muslim man called Mohannes took us around in his car, and he pulled up to this kind of precipice place and showed us the chain of Jewish settlements that were encroaching, on the Palestinian lands, and explaining. And they were a little bit surprised how much, Debbie and I didn't say we knew a lot, but just by our conversation, it's like they could sense that we did have an understanding. We weren't totally green about it in the situation. And so he said, something about going to the Waldorf Hotel. And I said, oh, no, we're staying at the Bethlehem Bible College. We can't, afford to stay in, expensive accommodation like the Waldorf, blah, blah. No, he said the Waldorf Hotel, WALLEDOFF. And we go, oh, what? So Google that one, and you find out that Banksy, the artist, and a couple of his friends bought a hotel, a premises right next to the wall, or the concrete section of the wall that Israel has built basically to keep the Palestinians contained, shall we say. But the brick or the concrete wall is just a part of the wall. The wall is actually the chain of settlements as well as concrete wall, etc. And so it's land rights are taken, water rights are taken. People can arrive home, send their child to school in the morning, and this child comes home in the afternoon, and suddenly there's a massive wall up there, and they're not allowed to go into their house again. That is a true story that happened right in the same block as the Waldorf Hotel. So Banksy and his artists have this hotel in which there is an interactive, museum kind of exhibition that you actually walk through and learn about the history of the wall, and see quite confronting photos and installations and films, etc., about the history of the situation there. The YMCA and the Student Christian Movement had actually paid, because it's a paid thing to sort of go through this museum, for us, showing us that hospitality to spend time at our own leisure to go through that museum, and also upstairs where the artworks of Banksy and his compatriots are displayed. So that was a total surprise, again, an uncharted, unexpected, unprecedented event, even within the event that we were doing. I guess I've got a few of those. There's some, as I said, agonies and ecstasies. We did put together, while we were at the Bethlehem Bible College, we did a rehearsal together. We couldn't believe how quickly the whole thing came together, but we called the presentation Penumbra, and it consists of solo dance work, duet dance work, and poetry presentations on our experience in the Middle East, and bringing scriptures such as dancing to Psalm 139, which is, about us being created and God knowing everything about us, and our days being in his book of life, and that's the one that talks about how we're intricately, I can't say it, made in the womb, and that we each have destinies to walk. And we were thinking in terms not just as an individual person, but in terms of a nation as a body being born and its future, etc. And we also choreographed a dance to the 1960s protest song, which has been reworked by a group called a heavy metal group. Hey, Matt, a heavy metal group called Disturbed. The Sound of Silence. If you remember the Simon and Garfunkel song, you can look up what the history of that song and what it's all about. But it starts off, "Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk to you again."
Don't have to look that one up.
Yeah. And so we did, this, so we did quite an expressive contemporary dance to that song, and then followed by quite a healing, gentle song by a duet, which is a man who is Jew and a woman who is a Christian singing in duet, and it's called All Is Well. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, it's not filmed. I think I've got a picture further down. Let me just have a look to see where I've got that picture up. There's a little picture of us performing that in Sweden. So it's quite dramatic, that particular protest song, but we incorporated some of the actions about what we saw. For example, when we were in Jerusalem, we saw people being frisked in public, a young, I guess, stereotypical person in some ways that was Muslim being pulled over by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, put up against the wall and frisked. And this was like in this narrow little street. They call them souk, S-O-U-K, that are the Arab markets. So we were in the Muslim quarter in the Old City in Jerusalem. And you have mums and kids, mums with strollers, you have kids, you have the shops and all that. And then suddenly you've got this funny little, it looked like a playpen, like these really these barriers that they put up that look like a playpen, and the soldiers sort of stand behind there on duty, and then they're on the lookout for people, and they it's quite humiliating for the individuals to be subjected to that sort of treatment, right when we're sitting like probably about 10 feet away in the old measurements, having our drink, our lovely coffee, cardamom coffee. We're sitting there out on the little balcony thing, and 10 feet away someone's being frisked, and there's big machine guns that the young IDF soldiers have, and mum's stopping there to give their kids a little drink of water and all this. So it's like this really surreal kind of experience. It's quite confronting for us who are not really used to seeing soldiers in the street, but because we had been there before, we had actually seen that sort of activity. So we even put some of those sorts of movements and things in our dance, and then of course moving to the more healing side of All Is Well. Okay, so we also met with an organisation called Musalaha. That's a lovely name, is it? Musalaha, which is in East Jerusalem, and it is by Christians, but they do incredible work with women and with refugees. They've got a peace and reconciliation program. So we thought, here's these two grandmas from the other side of the world that sort of knock on the door by email, I guess, in the first place, and say, we're creative artists and we want to, come over and listen to your stories. I've made it sound a little bit, more formal and making sense than I'm making out here in my sense of humour. We did get these appointments, and when we got there, we thought, are these people going to actually, keep the appointments? Because, we made them several months before. Sure, you do your confirmation emails and things like that. But I think they were we've struck it before when we were there previously, that when somebody makes a sacrifice to travel that far, to make human to human contact, something in their hearts are very moved. I mean, our hearts are moved to actually sit and speak with these people. And of course, in the Middle East, hospitality is a huge thing. So generally they would take you out for a meal and things like that. But, if it's like anywhere, if people don't want to talk to you, they could cut the appointment short, or, you get the vibe, you can read it in your spirits, what's happening. But I think because they knew that we were genuine, even if they didn't understand or didn't have much experience of the creative arts and how it could be used, particularly in their context, it's like they listened. And then you find out, well, they are using it because they do in their work with children, particularly they have a children's choir. With youth, they obviously use music, song, all that kind of stuff. So, but they wouldn't have thought of it particularly as arts, but they did appreciate that. So in coming back here, arriving back after this trip, we are really investigating and praying about ways that we can keep these connections up. And because I'm very widely networked beyond the dance fellowship and many different contexts, with people around the world doing some really interesting peace kind of work, that I'm sure I can connect them with those organizations, not to teach them or tell them, but as the true exchange and respect, and then trusting God to do that work, working through what your projects could be together. To, I guess there's a synergy. It's not just 1 and 1 makes 2, so you've got double the blessing kind of thing. It's like when God works, there's synergy at work. You've got more than the sum total of the parts. So one funny story that I did want to tell you was what we call the taxi driver from hell. Because we had to make so many connections. We did planes, trains, automobiles, taxis, buses, everything to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of logistical work, which we had the intercessors on call, which was really beautiful, because we got into some sticky situations from time to time. But we did stay up near the Lebanese border after we'd done our work in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, etc. We went by train up to near the Lebanese border because Debbie's friends have a lovely house there, and they wanted us to make sure we got there to see some real Israeli dancing, as they call it. Now, you might think of people, dancing in a circle and stuff like this, but no, this was like 80 couples. So these are Israeli couples that met on a weekly basis to do social dance together. So it wasn't like ballroom dancing, but it was couples dancing. It was really interesting. I haven't seen anything quite like it. So they did have a big circle, like the couples formed a circle, but they were singing and dancing to popular songs. It's like they'd memorized and they're popular, they knew them, and they're really quite complex little routines that they're all doing. So Debbie and I couldn't just like step in and fumble our way through, which we can sometimes with other things, being dancers, but this was just a bit too complex, so we kind of like sit and watched a lot of it. They did have some circle dancing which we could have joined in usually, but that person was sick, so that group was off that night. But to get back to the airport in time to fly to Denmark to get into Sweden, we thought, it's cheaper if we just get a taxi, because it should be like a 2-hour ride, than to stay in a hotel overnight and be ready, for the early flight in the morning, blah, blah, blah. So we thought, okay, we'll leave it. We want to leave at 5 a.m. To get to the airport by 7, to be there 3 hours before your flight. And so the taxi driver turns up at 5:30. No, it's fine. But the thing is that in Israel, this was on a Sunday morning. So they have Sabbath, Friday night till Saturday night. And then the Sunday morning is like their Monday. So you have all the people, imagine, say, for example, in Sydney, you have people, zooming up to the Central Coast or, South Coast or whatever it is for the weekend, and then driving back early in the morning. Well, of course, it was on Sunday morning and the traffic was absolutely atrocious. And we're thinking, we're going to make the flight. So this guy, we were really worried about his health actually, because he was extremely large, and we thought he's having a diabetic episode here while he's driving, because he's like swerving all over the road. Fortunately, I was in the back seat, but he had the console, and he had these big bottles of iced water, and he was drinking that, and he was eating lollies, and he was like, I could see, diagonally, me sitting in the back seat there, his eyes were kind of closing, and Debbie was in the front. So, when he was going near the edge of the road or the middle of the road or whatever, we go, oh, so I'm texting away, to get the intercessors onto it. And then he says, oh, would you like to have a 15-minute comfort stop? And we go, oh, no, we're right. We just really need to get to the airport. And he goes, oh, that's okay, but I do. So he pulled over to this roadhouse, and he had his 15-minute comfort stop, which was probably lots of coffee, and then back into the car. And so off we were, sometimes crawling in the traffic, and sometimes he's going really fast, when he got a braking. So we thought, so we made it to the airport in one piece. And then, but it's not like the airport, it's summertime. We would normally never travel in the summer because of the crowds in the Northern Hemisphere, and just after COVID lifting restrictions, everyone wants to travel. But you know how it's quite neat in Australia and a lot of other countries where you have, your paddle class, you go, you've got the barriers up, and you just, slowly weave your way around. Well, they've got the barriers up and things like that, but people are ducking under there, and it's, Middle Eastern rah culture pushing into the counter, and we're not really used to that. So we had to kind of push our way into, we had people, pushing in front of us, who, and all this sort of stuff. So it was quite a crazy episode. So that was one of the times when the intercessors on call really helped us. And guess what? The flight was delayed. So we didn't miss the flight. And one more flight story, Istanbul to Copenhagen on the way back. We felt as though we were interceding, because that route through the Middle East and then up through Copenhagen into Sweden was actually like a route that some of the Holocaust survivors, in a sense, used back in those times through Denmark, which was sympathetic to, they had the underground, sympathetic to the Jewish cause, and they went up into Denmark, into Sweden, to relative safety at that time. And my parents were actually in that era. They were in their 20s during World War II in Europe, and my mother with Jewish ancestry, and I'm pretty sure my father did too. They went through all the horrors of those times. So when we were at Istanbul airport, we couldn't understand why we were being shunted. We were told to go here, we were told to go there. It's a brand new airport. It's very large. And I noticed on our ticket it had standby. And I thought, hang on a minute, we booked and paid for these tickets back in March. What are we doing in July or the beginning of August having standby on our tickets? So we had to find the transit desk. We were given wrong information. Again, texty to the intercessors, please help, because we've got to make this. So finally, after asking, going up and down escalators and lifts and back to information and all this sort of stuff, we got down to the boarding gate, but there were several flights leaving from the same boarding gate. So it's absolute mayhem. There were people, sitting, standing in queues, all kinds of stuff. And a lady came up to us and she said, oh, excuse me, are you two all right? And we sort of go, why? And she said, I saw you here about an hour and a half ago. So it was a person in uniform. I thought maybe she was a little angel in uniform. I don't know, but she'd noticed us. And we'd explained what the situation was. And we thought, what's going on here? And she said, oh, well, I'm sorry, but just apologies, but it's summer. And she said, we overbooked by 20%. Now, not 5% or 10%, 20% they overbook. So you're lucky if you get on your flight. So anyway, she had a word to a guy. He took our boarding passes like we checked in our luggage, and he took our boarding passes, and on the back of the boarding passes is the luggage claim as well. And we thought, oh no, this guy's got our boarding passes, and he sort of like was holding up a stack of boarding passes like a hand of cards, and he was sort of like picking out names and calling out, oh, they're the ones that are going to get on the flight. So I thought, okay, intercessors on the job again. And so it was getting down to the last handful of people. Debbie's name, I think, was the third last name called or something, and I hadn't been called. And I stood there and I said, we can't be separated. So I've never had it before, but my name was the last name called to board the flight. And as we were shunted along to go through that covered passageway, before you board the plane, there was a lady screaming behind me, behind the counter there, her and her husband and child, absolutely screaming her head off, because obviously they needed to get on the flight, but I was the last one. And I thought, oh, that's like a picture to me. It was like a little experience of what it might have been like, for people today, the refugees in situations, as well as back, the times of the Holocaust, etc. Are you going to make it? You might be the last one, but there's all those people left behind. So it was quite a visceral experience for us that we're still sort of processing through things like that happened. And then, so we did get to Copenhagen, we should say, apparently. And there's a little photo of our luggage trolley there. And also there are obviously a lot of wind turbines, etc., in the Scandinavian countries. And then we're on to Gullbranna, which is, we went by train from Copenhagen to Halmstad, and Gullbranna is a little beach Christian campsite where the Dance Fellowship Conference was. And so we were able to share seminar papers that we'd written before the trip, and then added our experiences of the trip. So yeah, just a few little photos there. A fika is a Swedish snack time. That's a staircase in Halmstad Library. We went bushwalking. So that's it from me to say what an amazing uncharted territory trip it was. And so over to anybody if they've got any quick questions.
Any questions, comments?
I just want to say, wow, I guess I was thinking the whole time about the fact that really your ancestors were from that region, and that processing for you of what they had to deal with. The things you had to deal with were minor compared to what they had to, but nevertheless processing that, aware that you had so much prayer behind what you did. So it's just a comment rather than a question.
We were actually aware, it turned out, that there were several people in prayer networks that had been called back to European destinations around the same time as us, to actually put their feet on the ground, in a sense, to walk and intercede. And so we were, two people out of many that had these, in a sense, prayer kind of assignments. But I guess ours was a little bit different, being creative artists.
I'll just comment to Lucy that yes, I am familiar with that band and the song.
A bit unusual, I was going to say, at the conference, the type of dance and subject matter that we presented was kind of quite unusual, because some of it was, a lot of it was like, praise and worship type stuff, and about, Jesus healing me, and big testimonies that were just wonderful and very inspiring. But on that social justice, peace building aspect, there was very little. And it did bring a few people out of the woodwork that had some great conversations later on about that. So, the Anabaptist heritage and way of, that shalom, peace building, all that kind of stuff. Yes, we've got to get more of that out there, and I'll be doing that more and more.
So, Lucy, do you have any kind of video of any of that? You've shown us pictures. Is any, like, were any of your dances videoed?
Yes, a little bit in Sweden. Again, like we're just like, again, FAFA funding, the whole movement is FAFA funding. We don't have massive technology stuff and we're always pioneering. There was some, if I do get that footage, yeah, I'll sort of let people know.